Hello everyone, welcome back to the Chess Geek channel. I am thrilled to be starting on a new journey with you. In this Masterclass series, we are going to look in real depth at the Caro-Kann, which is e4, c6. I'm going to structure this Masterclass like I have structured all of the other Masterclasses I have made, where we are going to target and look at all of the common and likely possibilities you're going to see from the white side. And that means that after they play e4, you're likely going to know the resulting positions and territory a lot better than your opponent, because we play c6 and now we're going to cover all of the top moves. There's going to be a total of 9 chapters. This is an introduction where I will be discussing the main ideas and focal points of this repertoire, and then there's going to be 8 more theory-based chapters. I should emphasize there is going to be complete PGNs to everything that I discuss on my website. Link is in the description. So if you'd like, after watching these videos, to continue studying and memorizing these lines, I definitely recommend it. You can get those PGNs and put that into Lichess, Chessbase, Chessable, whatever your favorite website or platform is. So with that out of the way, let's jump straight in and look at my main recommendations that we're going to be looking at. So the first chapter that we are going to be discussing is the advanced variation with e5, and I'm recommending the move c5, which is a secondary choice. The more common option is, of course, bishop to f5, but the reason that I'm playing c5 is very logical. When we play bishop f5, our idea is eventually still to go c5 and attack the center. What I'm doing is I'm playing c5 immediately, not committing my bishop to f5, and so that means that if they were to develop their knight before we develop our bishop can get an improved square on g4. So that's a very basic idea of why this move order can be a bit more ambitious and a bit more tricky. So we're playing c5, and the first chapter is going to look at c3. And this is a very common and solid way for white to play. Their idea is to support the center and make it difficult for us to put enough pressure. But that's exactly what we're going to try to do. We're going to develop our pieces in a harmonious way so that they all end up attacking and putting pressure on this focal d4 point. So that's going to kind of be the basic strategy behind the way that we play. The second chapter is going to look at d takes c5, which I'm sure some of you were thinking about. This is a bit more of an aggressive way for white to play. Their idea is they're sort of ditching the center, and they are creating some clear weaknesses, but they're up a pawn. And if they can successfully defend both pawns by means of f4 and b4 ideas, then indeed we could be in a little bit of trouble. And so what I'm recommending is the move knight to c6. We're immediately putting pressure on one of these weak pawns, and you'll see very quickly we're also going to add pressure onto this one. And so we're going to play in a way that combats their system. We're not going to let them get comfortable with the extra pawn. We're immediately going to try to win it back and then have our extra center control that now they lack. So that's the first 2 chapters. Chapter 3 is the fantasy variation, which is this move f3. Now, the fantasy is not the most common variation, but it's one of the first ones that I learned, and I think it's a very fun one to explore. The idea for the white side is they're trying to maintain their very strong center. When they push or they take, they're getting rid of the tension. Here, they're keeping the tension on the board, and they're basically forcing us to be the ones to take, and their claim is that they have a huge center, and indeed they do, which is why I am immediately going to be recommending the move e5 to, again, combat that center, not let them get too comfortable with this extra space in the center. Now, I should mention, this variation, the fantasy, gets very tactical very quickly. For example, the main continuation is knight f3. We pin their knight, and now bishop c4, already threatening some nasty tactics. And, because they have various weaknesses and we have various weaknesses as well, the position is very double-edged and tactical. And so this is the most important chapter to really memorize the lines. In the other chapters, it's truly enough to just know the ideas and strategies, and you can get away with playing different move orders. Here, however, because of the very aggressive and tactical nature of the position, you do definitely want to completely understand these positions, but not to worry. I definitely cover these very in-depth in the video for the fantasy chapter 3. Chapter 4 is the main line, which is d5, and now the move knight to c3. And we're going to take, they're going to take. And here, my recommendation is knight f6. This is the most common variation. And in this chapter, chapter 4, we're going to look at the Tartakower, which is knight takes f6 and e takes f6. In the next chapter, we're going to look at alternative options white has, retreating the knight to g3, moving the knight to g5, defending the knight in a variety of ways. So we're going to look at the other less common alternatives, but this is definitely the most common variation. And this is one of my favorite chapters because there's a very specific and annoying plan that we can try to employ. If white ends up castling short, what we're going to try to do is set up all of our pieces in such a way where we get a huge attack going on the king side. And so I'll just quickly show that. I don't want to spoil exactly what happens, and I will, of course, talk about all these moves in depth in the dedicated chapter. But just to show you what I mean, we developed in a very specific developing scheme where our knight has moved to f8, and it's going to jump to g6 in a second. Our bishops developed very powerfully, and we're already threading a nice tactical idea. Maybe you can already try to think a little bit about these sort of positions. What probably do we have, what trick do we have up our sleeves in that sort of position? So that's a very exciting chapter for sure. After that, as I mentioned, we're going to look at all their alternatives in this position. So we're going to move on to chapter 6, which is the two knights variation, which is now white delaying playing the move d4 and going for either knight f3 or knight to c3, something like this, where they get their two knights out, and instead of going d4, they first develop their pieces. Now, luckily for us, the other chapters that I've done will show you a lot of these positions already. And so because I've made the chapters very consistent, the lines very similar, you already know these positions if you've studied the other chapters quite well. So what we're going to do here is take and then go knight f6. And what you can see is if they take, which is the main option, they're going to try to play d4. Of course, they need to get control of the center, but the second they play d4, we've transposed now into that variation that I just showed you a couple of chapters ago. And so, you know, they have other alternatives, some of which also transpose to other positions, but the general basis that you'll see is that these positions with the two knights tend to be very similar to the mainline variation, and that's why there's a lot of overlap, and it's less studying that you have to do, which is, of course, good. Moving on, we are now going to look at chapter 7, which is the exchange variation, so they're taking, and this position is very boring. There's no way around it. Some of your opponents will take. I hate playing this, not because it's objectively bad. I mean, we're fine here, but it isn't the most exciting, and that is why I spent a good amount of time trying to find the correct way to go about this position, where we get good, aggressive, and very ambitious play in this sort of position. Because if we just go ahead and develop all of our pieces normally and not really think about where we're placing in our ideas, then you're just going to get a normal average middle game where it's really anyone's games, not a lot is going on. The way that I actually recommend playing this position is a bit more specific. I recommend developing your queenside pieces, right? So knight to c6, developing your bishop, to then go e6, develop your other bishop, everything seems normal. But then instead of placing the knight on f6, placing the knight on e7. The reason is that I'm going to be recommending a very quick expansion with f6 and e5. If you're familiar with the Carlsbad pawn structure from the white side, this is very similar to that expansion where we're going for two main plans. We're going for some minority attack, gaining space on the queen side, and we're going for this f6, e5 expansion, which will get us good space and play in the center. So I think I've definitely done a good job of spicing up this otherwise boring position, and I think you'll be a bit more excited to play this once you see that chapter. Hopefully, that's the idea. The final chapter, chapter 8, is going to be a sub-variation of this exchange variation. We're going to be looking at the move c4 here, which is the Panov. We're also going to be covering the Panov by playing c4 in this position, which is another way that your opponent might play. So those are the two variations that we're going to look at in chapter 8. Now, once again, my recommendation is fairly unique, and chances are you haven't seen a recommendation like this against the Panov, because again, you can develop kind of normally without thinking of a plan, but you're not necessarily fighting for something. So my recommendation is we're going to be developing in a way to apply maximum pressure to the c4 pawn. We're going to place our bishop on e6, where it will be surprisingly solid, and therefore we're developing our other bishop to g6, from using g6 to g7. And so you're going to see a very unique and interesting approach to these sort of positions, and I really think that you will enjoy my take on the Panov variation. So hopefully you guys are excited for the Caro-Kann Masterclass. I really put a good amount of work in this. This is an opening that I play myself. I mean, I've played the Caro for as long as I can remember, and it's truly been a weapon of choice for me. And I'm very excited and thrilled to pass that on to you. So if you guys are new around here, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss out on this masterclass coming to you. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.